what we can do with nuclear waste. The spent fuel rods have a lot of energy still left in them, a lot of potential energy still left in them. And now what we're seeing is they are recycling fuel rods over and over until there's very little left. So this repository could be, we're going to put it here until we get that the technology perfected, where they'll be taking those spent fuel rods and reusing them.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. In this week's episode, we want to do a little bit of a two-parter here, just a brief update on some things going on in the state of Colorado, and later a little bit of a federal energy update. But to start, we want to talk about an interesting series of events that have been reported out of Northwest Colorado and some exploratory discussions that have been going on over the potential of bringing nuclear waste storage to that region.
Jake, I call this sort of the ultimate coal to nuclear transition, because this isn't just, we're not talking just about a power plant. So for listeners and viewers, just to, sort of as a reminder, what we've covered about Northwestern Colorado. Remember, there's Craig Power, which was one of the largest employers in Northwestern Colorado, in Craig, Colorado, huge contributor to the property tax base in that area. Without Craig Power, the town of Craig, and really that whole area, that's Moffat County, I think, that whole area, you can throw that into a significant depression. Craig Power, large employer, like I said, a huge contributor to the property tax base. And so with the closure of Craig 1, 2, and I think there were 3 generators there, if I remember, but with the closure of that, besides just the loss of a significant baseload power in Colorado, are just the economic impacts of that. And the question has been, what do we do with that area? What do you do with it? You also have an asset there, right? There's an asset. You've got an area that is designed for a power plant. You have transmission lines there. The idea of just dumping it in today's world, where we don't have enough power to meet demand. We're talking about spending hundreds of billions of dollars just in the state of Colorado to build out to meet future demand. Why would you just dump this asset and leave it there when it could easily transition from coal to nuclear? So we've talked about that power plant transition, but then they wanted to do one better. And that is the question we always get, because we talk a lot about nuclear, big fans of nuclear on this show. What do you do with the waste? I get that all the time. What do you do with the waste? And there was an interesting story from KUNC about it, and Matt Solomon, who runs this project, about bringing nuclear to Northwestern Colorado, but also in particular talking about a project where, what if Northwestern Colorado not only generated power from nuclear energy, but what if they were also the repository for nuclear waste? And before everybody nuclear waste, and I love this in the article, it even says, don't think of The Simpsons. It's not a bunch of green slime. And by the way, it's not as much as we think it is. And do you mind if I just show a real quick graphic? I'll show you and then let Jake chime in on all of this. We could bring nuclear waste to Colorado, and if you think there's a lot of it, there isn't. And the nuclear waste of one person for their lifetime, if you were, you spent your entire time, or your entire lifetime, you were powered with nuclear power, you used nuclear power, it'd be the equivalent of a can of Coke. Right? You'd fill up a can of Coke. And there's actually even better developments about that nuclear waste. So to some extent, that nuclear waste could almost just be a temporary repository, but we can talk about that and the SAVE Act in just a minute.
Yeah. So this story I just found fascinating because, like you said, it's not just talking about bringing a nuclear power plant. It's jumping straight into hard mode. The thing that's the biggest hangup for a lot of people with nuclear energy, which I think is fascinating. And obviously, nuclear waste storage has been a hot topic politically for decades. The whole Yucca Mountain fiasco that was supposed to be the permanent repository, and then Harry Reid said, and now the government's like, I don't know what we're going to do for a permanent repository. So to see Northwestern Colorado kind of take the lead and say, hey, we'll welcome that. We'll welcome the economic opportunities that may bring is fascinating. So the story, like you said, from KUNC by a reporter named Scott Franz, he's done a series of these reports and talking about what's being proposed and some of the pushback. One, I think, under discussed story that I think we're going to play out is a little bit of a, I don't know, regional cultural divide just in that particular narrow slice of Northwest Colorado, because it sounds like Moffat County is maybe a little cautious, but open to this because, like you said, 50% of their economy is tied to coal in some form or fashion, whether it's the plant or mining. And then you have nearby Routt County, which is steamboat, and it's a resort town, and they're going to the mats saying that this is absolutely not going to happen, and who cares what happens to Moffat County, but you're not doing that in our backyard. So I think that's interesting because it's almost symbolic of some of the energy fights we've seen statewide between metro urban regions and rural regions that are scrambling to try to accommodate the so-called energy transition that's going to leave them behind, and getting pushback from the people that are comfortable and are going to be fine no matter what happens. So I think that's interesting as well.
So the rich people in Steamboat don't want it.
Right.
But the working class in Moffat County is like, we need jobs.
Yeah.
And actually the interesting thing on this too is that State Senator Dylan Roberts, who is also part of the HB 25-1040, so HB 1040, which is the nuclear as clean bill, he represents Moffat County in that area. He was quoted in that story with KUNC, and I would call him, I mean, he's looking for those opportunities. Yep. So he's not a hard no on this. And I'm not going to say, put words in his mouth and say he's definitely a yes. He is somebody who is looking out for his constituents, meaning he knows that the closure of Craig, what is that Craig power, what that's going to do to Moffat County and to the city of Craig. And it talks about a number of these sort of small towns in Northwestern Colorado that, by the way, they know about uranium mining. They know about nuclear energy, and they're not afraid. What they know is that they can do it the right way. And the other thing I mentioned earlier was that this could just be a temporary repository. And the reason I say that is there was a law passed, there was a bill passed. Actually, Congress did get something passed at the end of last year, but it was part of the SAVE Act, and it was about what we can do with nuclear waste. And it was, the spent fuel rods have a lot of energy still left in them, a lot of potential energy still left in them. And now what we're seeing is they are recycling fuel rods over and over until there's very little left. So this repository could be, we're going to put it here until we get that, the technology becomes perfected. I think they're actually doing it in France, but the technology is perfected where they'll be taking those spent fuel rods and reusing them. So this isn't a forever thing. What I love about this, you talked about the cultural divide, maybe. And I think that's true. What you have in places like Craig, Colorado, and some of those other smaller towns around there that are willing to do this is this innovative, entrepreneurial, rugged frontiersman spirit, right? And women. That's not be frontier men and women, but it's that spirit of, we can do this. And by the way, we can probably do it better than anyone else. So let us do it. And with that, give us the economic opportunity and the jobs that comes with it.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And for the people out there that are maybe a little hesitant or skeptical, you sort of get it if you don't really know a lot about this space. Someone's talking about bringing a nuclear waste ground to your community, to your backyard. We understand that. We've talked about Colorado's sort of complex history with nuclear, and especially nuclear weapons and that sort of a thing. And it all sort of gets conflated, I think, in the public psyche. But one aspect of this that I think is important, and as you mentioned, Dylan Roberts being a part of this, that I want to give him credit for is he's talking about this could just be one small step into showing that Northwestern Colorado is open for the energy future. Maybe it's a nuclear waste storage facility one day, and then that inspires a power producer to come bring a state-of-the-art nuclear plant to the region, and how that can kind of compound and bring that region of the state to the the energy future.
Right. It maybe they are the hub of the of advanced energy for the future. That's a great point. Maybe they are the center of advanced energy for Colorado, this place that was, so heavily dependent on coal could be, I don't want to say dependent, but could be the power generation point for Colorado, and good for them because they've been through a lot. Those people have been through a lot,
Yeah.
and they've been a political punching bag to some extent. That's why I'm really impressed with what how Dylan Roberts has represented them, whether it has been on this coal to nuclear transition or looking at the opportunity of having a nuclear repository there. And again, temporary until we perfect that technology to reuse those fuel rods. I just I'm impressed with both Northwestern Colorado, Moffat County, their willingness to look at the possibilities out there, and Dylan Roberts being a champion of them.
Yeah. And like we said, this is still early stages.
Yep.
These are just exploratory conversations, but we'll, of course, be staying on top of this as that progresses. Maybe we'll even try to get some of these folks onto the show to kind of talk about some of the work they're doing out there. But we will keep you guys updated on that. Outside of Colorado, the other thing we wanted to update you all on at the federal level, we talked about Trump's nomination of Chris Wright, Coloradan Chris Wright, to be the head of the Department of Energy. Well, he's since been officially confirmed. And now that he's taken his new position, he sort of laid out the priorities of the Department of Energy under his tenure. And there's some fabulous stuff in there if you want to tell our listeners.
Yeah, so he has a 9-point plan, and there was a story in an outlet that that we read, Jake and I read, called Utility Dive. Don't worry, you don't have to go find it. We'll put it in the show notes. But there's a 9-point plan that Chris Wright, now Secretary Wright for Secretary of Energy, that he put out, that he calls it's titled Unleashing the Golden Age of American Energy Dominance. And there are 9 points, and actually it dovetails well with what we were just talking about. And I want to mention 3 of the 9 points real quickly. And I will say they just so happen to be 3 of my favorites of the 9-point plan, but there's something in there for everyone, including things like consumer appliances, a number of other things. But the very first one, I think, is the single most important, which is, probably why it's listed as number 1. We have talked about this so much on the narrative over the last even couple of decades, and I'll go back to the Bush administration even on this. It has been this energy deprivation narrative that we need to go on a starvation diet, that somehow we shouldn't be using energy. Yet, here's the thing. There are no wealthy, prosperous countries that have a high educational attainment that don't use energy. Like those two they don't, like oil and water, they don't mix. It's not going to happen. So number 1 on Chris Wright's 9-point plan, advance energy addition, not subtraction. Well, what does that mean? It means they're going to start focusing on baseload power. So that would be number 1. And I'll number 7. This gets to Craig Power. Unleash commercial nuclear power in the United States. And 9, streamline permitting and identify undue burdens on American energy. So get the nuclear renaissance going, which could be an absolute gift to Northwestern Colorado, but also this idea of energy addition, not subtraction. So what we could see too on this in Colorado, and this is something we talked about, does this mean that there is a possible reprieve for early retirements of coal plants? That those don't happen quite as quickly. And I know that there have to be some probably EPA haze regulations that have to be rolled back, but I suspect that they would do that if you have to have that baseload power. We've already seen North Carolina has extended the life cycle of their coal plants. There were two others. I think it was Talon that did
Yeah, I
two
think
more.
Indiana.
Yeah. So this is happening. So I don't know if this happens in Colorado, but this idea of energy addition, not subtraction.
Yeah, there's a couple things on that, just the ones you laid out. And we'll, of course, we'll attach the full order in the show notes so you can see all the 9-point plan. But one thing that I love about this is it just shows where the priorities of the administration are going to be, sort of hitting the ground running on laying out this vision of, it just so happens to be a lot of the stuff we talk about all the time, which is fabulous. Energy addition, abundance, not being ashamed of being an energy producing country, not being afraid to consume energy. It's okay. You don't have to, otherize or treat load like it's a bad thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's good that we have a prosperous, advanced society that uses energy to produce wonderful things and to live prosperous lives. The other thing I love about it is, like you mentioned, the inclusion of nuclear. You saw a lot of, he was confirmed with a decent showing of bipartisan support, but some of his detractors were alleging that he's just going to be a fossil fuel guy and in the tank for only fossil fuels, and that's it because he comes from that background. But he put nuclear energy in his day one priorities for the Department of Energy, and it just goes to show that this administration is taking seriously all forms of energy that will enhance American energy stability, security, reliability, and abundance. So I think that's great.
I do too. And I want to say this. If you look at the Venn diagram of, for instance, those who believe that climate change is an existential threat, and those who believe that lack of power is an existential threat, like that's the threat. The one place they overlap is nuclear. So we can say it out loud, like we can say nuclear out loud. So yeah, I'm excited about this. This is a directive that has been sorely needed. Stop paying lip service to it, but absolutely include all of this in a 9-point plan so that we can talk about it in polite company.
It's a good point. To your point about the Venn diagram thing, I think that's interesting. Is also you're seeing at the federal level in particular the being more willing to speak about the bipartisan consensus around nuclear. We had the bipartisan bill that you mentioned, the Congress actually doing something that carried bipartisan support. The Biden administration pledged to triple nuclear capacity. Now, Chris Wright is saying we're going to absolutely pursue the nuclear renaissance. And we have to wonder, a little bit of a teaser of some work that we're doing elsewhere, if that's ever going to come to Colorado. The fact that everywhere else it seems to be that the Venn diagram, people are embracing the center of that Venn diagram, and perhaps Colorado will be next on that.
You would hope, but the one place where the Venn diagram doesn't overlap seems to be the Gold Dome in Colorado, in Denver. I don't understand what has happened to them, or did they not get the memo, or do they just have this sort of religious adherence to wind, solar, and batteries that nuclear can't be part of the conversation, or can't even be included in talks about how the state is going to decarbonize. We've talked about this. There's actually a bill out there. There was not just a bill, it's a law where Will Tour and the Colorado Energy Office is supposed to promote nuclear energy. Was it 2019? I think it passed.
2018.
2018,
Senate Bill
2019.
3,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah, okay, so they're supposed to promote it. Now, as last time I checked, which admittedly was a little while, it was probably 10 days ago, there was nothing about promoting nuclear on the CEO's website. So they're in defiance of the law, or is that by omission or commission? I don't know, but the point is, at both the executive level and at the legislative level, there is they have blinders, or they literally just block out nuclear. So the question is this the year for nuclear power? Let's hope so.
Yeah, let's hope so. We'll, of course, stay on top of that, and whatever else comes out of the Department of Energy under Chris Wright's tenure, especially as it relates to nuclear, as we see these stories dovetailing quite nicely. But as we're coming up on time here, Amy, do you have any takeaways for our audience?
I do. Under Chris Wright as Energy Secretary, I feel like we could have nice things again. I feel like I love the way you put it. We don't have to otherize baseload power. Like, we can actually talk about it and have it not be a bad word. And as a result, we can have nice things. We can actually have that. That's number one. Number two, I love this idea of the ultimate coal to nuclear transition for Northwestern Colorado, looking at the entire ecosphere of nuclear energy, the entire, actually almost be the entire supply chain.
Yeah.
Could be right there in Northwestern Colorado, and what that could mean, not to just to that region, but the entire state, that we could embrace nuclear energy yet again. We were groundbreaking at the end of the 19th century. We could be groundbreaking again. And then three, until all of that happens, you should still have a generator. Don't think that you're out of the woods on that yet. But so until we get that base load that allows us to have nice things, until we start embracing that, and that includes nuclear, just make sure you have a little something to keep the power on in your own home.
You heard her, folks. That does it for us on another episode of PowerGab. If you like what you heard here, you can head over to powergab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or guests that you'd like to see us interview, you can send those over to info@powergab.org. We'd love to hear from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.